In case of fire, break glass, they always say. Well, for McLaren, the biggest fire they could possibly endure is one of their current drivers walking. Which one exactly? Well, it's not the one you think, but we'll get to that. While the world focused on the final press conference of the year, which I broke down over in this video, something seismic slipped under the radar. McLaren blowing up and then rebuilding their entire driver development program. On the new version, I have plenty of thoughts.
By the power of hot takes, I have opinion!
It started with Alex Dunne, as we all know, the Irish F2 driver whose F1 stock surged after a solid year backed by McLaren, and matching Piastri's time effectively in FP1 around Spielberg. That really got people talking. I saw it firsthand in my vlog during the Grand Prix weekend, and safe to say, the atmosphere at that Grand Prix when Alex did all of that was very, very electric. And based on that timing, you think, well, hey, this Irish kid's the heir apparent. He's this quick with Lando and Oscar already? Just imagine what will happen if one of them suddenly oh no, he's gone. As we saw, Dunne was destined for another academy, according to Helmut Marko's wishes, abandoning the McLaren program for a faster ticket. He thought he was trading a structured, slightly boring McLaren ladder for Marko's fast track. But as we found out, the deal was cancelled by Red Bull HR, Marko was left out of a job, and then Dunne was left to fend for himself. So basically, Alex got Dunne for a loop, in that he was thinking he was going to the most reliable driver academy on the grid, and instead, he's now having to maybe find refuge at the Alpine Academy because there's no way McLaren's going to take him back now. That is almost cartoon-level irony right here, because even though the McLaren driver development program isn't nearly the sexiest academy out there, it has ultimately produced a world champion, that being Lando Norris. And Dunne's story right here is the final chapter in what was Formula One's kingmaker, Helmut Marko, in that maybe these days you just cannot trust a figure like that since F1's gone extremely corporate. Gut feelings have to go through committee. All at the same point where Norris and Piastri are proving to be one of the best bets in Formula One right now. They are very much part of the elite and McLaren has two of them. This has really gotten out of hand. Then, of course, there was another purge, which sort of went under the radar based on the fact that they weren't really household names. I'm talking about the departures, which I actually covered on the channel already, Ugo Ugochukwu, Martini Stention, and Luca Badoa. Badoa's exit? Yeah, that was expected, honestly. He crashed or underperformed in nearly every F3 race I actually watched, but with the other two, those were really big surprises, especially the latter. The American being joined at the hip by Zach Brown from a very young age and receiving glowing endearment not that dissimilar to Lando Norris in his formative years. Granted, Ugo's debut F3 season wasn't much to look at, he very much ended up in the middle of the table, but we have seen transformations from Dunne, who went from a middling F3 driver to a top 5 contender in Formula 2 with McLaren's backing. Now Ugo's off to Campos, and based on the last couple of years, Campos is a really solid championship-making outfit, both in Formula 3 and Formula 2. It's not like with Trident, where they're fantastic in Formula 3, but in Formula 2, where are they? And then Ugo just goes and tops the Super Formula test casually, by nearly half a second, and considering that Super Formula is often considered to be on par or slightly faster than Formula 2, oh man, McLaren's really going to miss this kid. And then there's Stenshorn. That was just as weird. In Freca, he was the runner-up, then 5th in his second F3 campaign. His rookie year at 16, that wasn't great, but he still had a massive upswing with McLaren's backing. So why drop these two? Well, my initial theories when I was getting the foam of doubt out initially was down to the fact that instead of this being down to simply underperforming to McLaren's expectations, that it might have had something to do with the way the driver development program was going. And where it has wound up right now, it's quite clear to see that maybe for Ugo and Martinius, the end point was not going to be a guaranteed ticket to Formula One like all of the other academies, or at least that's their intent. Doesn't necessarily always translate. But it might be down to the fact they will become some sort of utility driver, that McLaren can just say, oh, well, we've got something going, you can go over there. Well, I want to be in Formula One. No, you go over there. Because the endpoint that they want, Formula One, it's currently occupied by Norris and Piastri, and the earliest that that is going to change if McLaren had their way will be 2029, when Piastri's contract runs at the end of 2028. I think it might be quite safe to say that they might offer contract extensions, which we will see during this next season, 2026. Either Norris or Piastri will then get a little boost, so for anyone within that program, if they want to get into Formula One, it's not a guarantee. So no wonder Ugochukwu and Stenshorn decided to leave, especially when their stock is rising. I mean, that Super Formula thing, that was crazy. He was beating established talents in that series, and Super Formula is not to be ignored. It's not a podunk series. It's the elite of Japanese racing where Liam Lawson cut his teeth and he was able to out-qualify Max Verstappen in Singapore in his rookie year. It's good. It's legit. And the fact that Dunne was lured away, it probably gave them inspiration to leave because there were no F1-shaped lights at the end of the tunnel, so why even bother staying? Because yes, McLaren can maybe offer some work in world endurance, but that might not be enough for people who might have gone from karting hoping to remain in single-seaters. Yes, McLaren's junior moves do look chaotic on the surface, but if you line the dates and peoples up, it starts to look like a really cold, calculated reset in the wake of Alex's abandonment, because they redefine what the program is. It's no longer an F1 academy, lots of lottery tickets, but more acquiring a strategic driver portfolio that feeds 3 factory programs, as well as a source of reserve and development drivers across everything they run. And in fact, in their manifesto for their brand new program, they even name-checked the likes of Gabriel Bortoleto, who, admittedly, was only with them for a year, but was able to win the Formula 2 championship with McLaren backing before them being dropped and then heading over to Sauber/Audi. Something of which that Zach Brown said was a no-strings-attached opportunity for the likes of Sauber and trying to send yet more barbs towards Red Bull, saying, "Hey, Red Bull, we can get one of our guys on Formula 1 that easily. Why can't you? Yeah!" Yeah, that scores some points in terms of public perception, but it really does hurt you competitively because, well, look what Gabi's been able to do at that team before they become a juggernaut like Audi. They took on and developed a back-to-back champion who fitted their whole Piastri-Russell-Leclerc template, then sent him off. Audi will really benefit most of the upside. And with the Brazilian being part of that team from day one, he has far more potential to be better integrated there than he would have been at McLaren had he partnered up with Norris. The rookie may be reckoning that the team tends to emotionally invest in a longer-serving driver by default. Something of which he described in this interview here, one of which was really perceptive for someone so young, and maybe this might lend some credence and yet again bring out the foam of doubt that maybe Gabi decided to leave of his own volition and then Zach Brown decided to turn this into some sort of PR opportunity. Jump forward to now, we've got another Bortoleto-like figure. A man who may not have utterly dominated in the junior categories, but was the most consistent, and ultimately is the king, because consistency is king. Leo Fornaroli, the next back-to-back F3, F2 champion. They actually decided, unlike with Bortoleto, to bring in Leo once he actually secured that F2 championship. And now he is part of that program, the brand new recruits. Maybe this might have been a situation where Bortoleto's leaving was a never again sort of thing, because if you've got somebody like that and no one's picking up the phone to contact Leo for his services, then why don't you take him? That again, there might have been some regrets in the way that Bortoleto left the program after just a year, which again, with Alex Dunne, he was only around for a year. Yeah, that churn is really massive. That churn is even faster than Red Bull's usual churn. And then you layer on top all of the stuff that's going on with that Alex Palou court case. Seriously, what's going on with that Spaniard and the Americans' dealings in the courts is just the gift that keeps on giving. They're suing him, McLaren, for about $20 million over a breach of contract regarding the aborted IndyCar driver's move. And in court, he is openly saying he felt misled about a possible F1 golden ticket, either to replace Ricciardo or Piastri at the time, should the latter have drowned. As we all know, he didn't. Brown obviously underestimating the Australian there. From McLaren's point of view, what with the case of Dunne, Bortoleto, Palou, it reminds you if you don't have full and total control of the people that you wish to have within your program, it can easily blow up in your face and you end up with nobody. Because they were once attached to McLaren, could have been a very decent part of their program, but then they decided to walk because that's just not what their style was, bro. So maybe this might have been a situation where McLaren's trying to spin it in some way and cutting out all of the maybes of the program that may have decided that they didn't really subscribe to where McLaren was going and instead pick people who were much more willing to comply with the overall remit of having driver development programs fitting all 3 of their major categories: IndyCar, World Endurance from 2027, and obviously Formula 1. The new crop consists of, as I mentioned, Fornaroli for his championships, Richard Verschoor for his experience, which could be utilised in non-F1 sports. In fact, they will be, starting from next year in European Le Mans. The other 2 hires, Christian Costoya and Di Polo, they're relative unknowns in comparison, the latter starting in Formula 3 next year. But the team seems confident in their potential. But one thing is absolutely for sure, is that Richard Verschoor will, for sure, be in World Endurance because, well, he's doing European Le Mans. So if he wasn't going to World Endurance, that would have been a very odd choice for him to end up in that kind of machinery if that wasn't where the endpoint was going to go. Because, well, Richard Verschoor, I think slightly older than Piastri. Yeah, he's not going to Formula 1, mate. I mean, maybe IndyCar, maybe. But right now, McLaren's okay, but they're actually quite ruthless in that sport. So, I mean, who knows? But one thing we do know is that all of these drivers are not looking for an immediate ticket to Formula 1 anytime soon. But we will get to Leo in a moment because his story I think will be the most intriguing. This could explain why all the exits and the signings happened so close together within a couple of months. You can feel that Dunne's departure was the trigger for Fornaroli's last-minute appointment. Yeah, I'm not part of the program's hiring system, but the timeline we've discussed so far is really neat. But one thing I've found really weird is that Fornaroli has not been put on a pedestal since McLaren announced him. He didn't even get as much as a papaya rear wing, which was afforded to Gabriel Bortoleto last year in Formula 2. So it was almost like it was a sleeper sensation. Yes, of course, there might be situations where there was just simply no time to put a sticker on the car. You could easily just put on a McLaren sticker. Surely they've got some of those knocking around. Even a race suit, perhaps? A spare one? But maybe that was intentional. Maybe that was by design, so that means it didn't attract any undue attention, because it was quite a surprise for anyone in the know in the feeder series to get Leo, who everyone's been going, how come he's not affiliated? He's about to win the championship back to back, like all the other greats in the elites of Formula 1 right now. McLaren now have. They've managed to pick up a really interesting looking free agent, and who I think will be McLaren's ultimate insurance policy, because this is basically another Piastri, albeit not as dramatically successful as Piastri, but he still has the records, and he still has something that Lando Norris didn't actually achieve, because he didn't get the Formula 2 championship, let's remember that. And especially with Pato O'Ward concluding his testing duties for the Formula 1 outfit, they can maybe now bring in Leo in through private tests and through the simulator over the winter. It makes him feel slightly forgotten, which for a hungry double champion is perfect emotional fuel after the sheer relief of actually getting attention from a Formula 1 team at all. He was available at the moment your own F2 cornerstone walks out, and a hopeful for next year, Stenshorn, is also out. And as an additional bonus, he has no historical baggage with any other academy. And also, he's got no attachment to Helmut Marko whatsoever, so therefore he is a blank slate which Zak Brown can easily paint on the McLaren message. And he is going to be totally compliant. Happy to be there. Very suggestible. And also, people will not be going, oh, well, Leo's only that good because Red Bull taught him to do that, or he cut his teeth with Ferrari. No, whatever happens next, it's strictly McLaren coded. They can carve him into the ultimate papaya driver after all the experience they've learnt from Lando Norris's journey. Now, okay, I'll get the spanner out for this next bit. My main belief is that Leo Fornaroli is being geared up to potentially, in one reality, become Lando Norris's flunky. A number 2 driver. The good soldier in case Piastri and Mark Webber do end up walking off to another team, because next year's drivers market is going to be bananas. Zak may realise that papaya rules and 2 elite drivers was a failure. They need a yes boss type who stays in line, runs in the simulator, winding up becoming a Valtteri Bottas-like figure under the now champion. After years of having Mark breathing down their necks or Horner needling the Ricciardo saga, this is a kid who might actually do what he's told. To be fair here, there's a scenario where Norris himself could leave for one reason or another. Maybe even retire Jody Scheckter style, having now realised his dream, and in case if McLaren drops off the following year. It really helps that he's at the height of his powers right now. The moment his value spikes could also be the moment his loyalty may begin to dip, because he's king of the world. So maybe Leo is here not to necessarily automatically by default stir any pots within McLaren, but maybe he's right there to fill any sudden gaps. You know, smile for the sponsors, feed Lando and Oscar data, there'll be a really good useful tool in the simulator, somebody who has got that championship backing, someone who has the same profile as Piastri, and look how he turned out, he certainly exceeded expectations from Zak. He can then take some FP1 sessions every now and again, and he can really dial himself in. We will know for sure how good Leo is in that car if he does do some stuff in FP1 in that MCL40. In a team that may unintentionally, emotionally default to its longest-serving star, as said by Bortoleto. That is real gold, especially if McLaren get the regulations wrong. They'll have themselves right there, in Leo, a turnkey driver, because as has been made clear in Formula 1, contracts are written down, but they're not necessarily sacred. They can change. There are conditions, there are performance clauses, there are other clauses that can easily be breached and give a driver an opportunity to leave. Or, If things have gotten really bad, they don't care about the buyout clause. They'll do whatever it takes to get away, especially if another team is more than happy to foot the bill in case they'll reap the rewards for years to come. And also, it's good leverage for the drivers you already have, because look who they've got in the reserve role. It's not Pato O'Ward, who both Lando and Oscar can say, oh, well, he's destined for IndyCar, really. There's no pressure here. There might have been some pressure from Alex, but then he disappeared, so that pressure was taken off. There might have been some reason to feel good that their seats were secure. But now with Leo, who has those championships, that might be a little bit of more of a reminder for Lando and Oscar to negotiate fairly when it comes to potential renewals. That gives McLaren more leverage. Papaya rules gave them leverage over their own drivers. That works all the way through until your car turns out to be rubbish. If your car is rubbish, then you haven't got a leg to stand on. Papaya rules, they go out the window, like we saw in Monza 2023. That was an almost crash, and Stella came down on them hard when they weren't even fighting for a title. So okay, what does Fornaroli do right now? Well, obviously, he won't be in Formula 2 next year since he's a champion. That's the whole point of Formula 2. You can't stay in there. You have to move on. That is why these champions often end up as highly paid test drivers with no racing seat if they don't get said seat. The saga of Felipe Drugovich all too fresh in many Brazilian fans' minds. McLaren have already answered part of that in public because Fornaroli's part of their new program. So that likely means heavy simulator work and feeding back on the setups that Norris and Piastri procured during Friday practice and then spitting something out for Saturday morning, as well as maybe post-race stuff. Then they'll be obviously running old-spec F1 cars in private tests, the TPC ones, so maybe McLaren might be able to test Leo out in machinery that both Norris and Piastri have worked on. In the case of next year, it'll be the MCL38, the Constructors' winning car of 2024. That will be a very, very good barometer, and they can run it pretty much as often as they would like to. Then, of course, there'll be the FP1 sessions, 4 at minimum, with Leo probably doing all of them, since Pato's now out of that job, out of his own terms. Well, I mean, okay, maybe if a right buyer comes along, because that was the case of Toyota's Ryo Hirakawa, who apparently, according to, again, the Palou courts, Toyota and he paid a total of $3.5 million to do some FP1 sessions for them, as well as some TPC testing. And that ties in maybe to Key and Shields somehow getting an FP1 drive for Aston Martin. The right money came along at the right time. And also expect Leo to be around mission control at Woking. He'll be doing a lot of work in the simulator and then on the Sunday from their own base, channeling all of his thoughts into the process in terms of setup as well. So yeah, I think Leo is destined for Formula 1 reserve status, whereas obviously Richard Verschoor, doing European Le Mans, he is going to be their main ticket or one of their 3 drivers over for World Endurance. Now, of course, McLaren coming in is going to attract a lot of attention. I thought that Mick Schumacher was going to be destined for that, but I certainly doubt that he'll be going to try and do 2 programs at once like he did with Alpine and Mercedes. I think Mick's going to be doing IndyCar, and I'm looking forward to that. Other 2 drivers? I don't necessarily know at this point. But in regards to Leo, who is the main focus of this video, is he going to be the compliant number 2 kid behind Lando and Oscar? Well, in the short term, he kind of has to be. He'll be the new kid, joining a team built around those 2 during a championship era. He knows quite clearly that without McLaren's last-minute bid, he might have just wound up as another tragic F2 story. Nobody giving a toss about his own future. But long-term, though, everything about Leo's CV screams alpha. He's just emulated what other current F1 elites have done, such as George Russell and Charles Leclerc. Will he forever want to be a wingman, especially if he gains confidence? No. There'll come a time where he will want to prove himself. But what McLaren will like right now is that he is arriving at this team with absolutely zero team politics. He's just happy to be along for the ride, and that therefore makes him very, very useful and very, very drama-free. He has every reason to buy into McLaren's worldview. And what's also worth noting is that team principal Andrea Stella has said very often in the open he doesn't want to designate a number 1 or number 2 driver whilst Norris and Piastri are around. And while we talk about team orders and favouritism, the end result did produce a seemingly equal platform which didn't descend into chaos, at least right now. It'd be a major philosophical shift to turn all of that around and drop it and tell Fornaroli clearly, you are here to support our other guy, nothing more. Be thankful we hired you. The only way we will see that is that if it completely dissolves the relationship between Lando and Oscar, because Lando said in that final press conference that things are okay right now, but it takes one major bust-up for their friendship of theirs to completely dissolve and fall apart, Rosberg-Hamilton style. So more likely, McLaren will be hoping that their current system, their pecking order remains the same, where Lando and Oscar are a happy family and they have just enough capability to keep it together. If they don't, then they will just have to go to whatever Red Bull is doing. One driver rules all. Either way, McLaren are busy rebuilding their structure since they've had to deal with a lot of upheaval in the last couple of months, but what they've got right now should serve them well in all of the series that they are representing in. Yes, there's not much to say about Christian Costoya and Matteo De Polo, but they are very much in the beginnings of their career. McLaren are betting on the future, but they are now just kind of seeing where they might end up. They might be candidates for IndyCar, they could be candidates maybe once they bedded themselves in a WEC, or maybe in case both Norris and Piastri leave Formula 1, somebody could maybe slot in there, especially if they do well in F3 and F2. And with Verschoor definitely heading off to World Endurance, you can see the boss's new fingerprint all over this. Alessandro Oluni-Bravi arriving from Sauber to take charge of the program, and he goes on in the original remit to talk openly about a 5-year plan in undertaking proper scouting from karting upwards, hence Costoya. And in that context, the recent Exodus/Cull looks less we think they're bad and more like, yeah, we're having to tighten the funnel here. Maybe they weren't needed for McLaren's very specific plan, or the drivers themselves took a look at that plan and the team might have wanted them on board, but they just went, ew, no. Well, I mean, obviously, McLaren wouldn't want that telegraphed to the press that these drivers walked out because they didn't like what they saw. That wouldn't be a good look, so that's why they probably brought in Bravi, who is known for being a marketer. He was the team rep of Sauber, he wasn't the team principal. He made sure to try and telegraph and project Sauber's situation as a struggle instead of them just being absolutely dire. So when you put this all together, you get something along the lines of this, that McLaren's sick and tired of the reactive situation that's been going throughout the driver market of recent years. And instead of just putting all of their eggs in the Formula 1 basket, they're realizing, hey, there's a lot of drivers here that could be really good in our other categories as well. We can then maybe channel them to be the ultimate driver in all of our disciplines. A utility driver. You could just slot them in wherever you want them to, and they'll be more than happy to be there. So they build a system which is anchored by 2 winners, such as Piastri and Norris, lock them in ideally for the rest of the decade, and therefore they are a billboard for, hey, you could maybe reach these heights too with us, with papaya backing. We have a home for you. You don't have to worry about just Formula 1. We can maybe give you a dealing this fancy American series, and that really prestigious European endurance series, which is only becoming more and more popular. Oh, Formula E, don't mind that, because that in of itself, with that Gen 4 project, that's looking really spicy. You get Fornaroli, who's ready to work in the McLaren F1 cockpit, with Richard Verschoor, the Swiss Army knife of the group who can race pretty much anything, and then you've got future talents within karting and then eventually Formula 4 and Formula 3. If even half of that is true, then Dunne, Ugo, Stenshorn, and Bortoletto, they're not casualties, but more like recalculations. So instead of McLaren betting the farm on these drivers, they are providing them the grounds to develop for maybe future disciplines and categories. That means they can be versatile in pretty much anything they choose to partake in, which is the exact sort of thing that once you see it, it's very difficult to try and unsee. That, yes, Leo has his place as the ultimate insurance policy with Lando and Oscar, but Verschoor is there to help Ben in the WEC program. Yet they are putting out feelers for younger talent as well, especially all the way down in karting, something which Red Bull up until recently did not do. Marco preferably choosing people who'd already reached single-seaters. But what was also hard to unsee is this link to another video of your choice right here, because, well, I put it here, but I have good reason for putting it there, and I'll tell you all about it over there.